So welcome to all of you. I'm very happy to see so many persons and faces. And I'm particularly happy to welcome Professor Zhang, who by now, I may say, is a very good friend of the Center for Global Politics. Besides that, he's also Professor of International Relations at one of the most well-renowned Chinese universities, Jinan University in Guangzhou, or Canton. But besides that, we know him also because he's one of our 4 strategic partners for our Graduate School for Global Politics. And actually, many people you are seeing here around the table are members, students of the Graduate School for Global Politics, right? So we have a very good working relationship by now. Thanks very much for all these years of good cooperation. And we are slowly heading forward to establishing a joint degree for PhD studies in global politics, and I hope we can finalize it relatively soon. Please don't be surprised when some people, including myself, will eat, because it is announced as a brown bag luncheon. And a brown bag luncheon, people carry a brown bag, sometimes with food, right? So that's not in disrespect of your talk, it's just because it was announced as a brown bag.
Food is much more important.
No. You provide the intellectual food, and some people need additional food on the side. I think it's a very timely and very interesting topic we are addressing today. It's called International Relations as a Discipline in China, Challenges and Crisis. Professor Zhang is already about almost a week in Germany, so I think you got accommodated. No time lag anymore. And we are very much seeing forward to your talk, which will be followed by a Q&A session, right? Thanks for coming. It's your floor, please.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for coming, and especially thanks Professor Zegbes for arranging this lecture. And also thanks for invitation, and I do have some reflections about international relations. In reality, what is the difference in Europe and from Asia, It's very difficult for me to get a visa. And that's a long story. I can share this story later, But I got so surprised, actually. I got transfer from Paris here. And I thought, according to my, travel experience, in Paris airport, and I'm going to the transfer area. So that's the transfer area. Actually, it's not really in France, but I just passed the check very randomly, and I didn't realize. So I'm in France already, and especially after the flight from Paris to Munich, and when I arrived in Munich airport. So nobody asked me for check. I said passport. I showed someone. They said no, go. So this is it's really, and especially new. I think to be Asian, and still we are much more focused on the nation state, the border, the territory. So it seems the Europe are really in a very different. So that's why I'm trying to understand why the European scholars, they are much focused on constructivism. Much on focus on, the non-traditional security. Yeah, I think, so it's quite understandable. But, so that's, why I'm talking about, international relations as a discipline and in China. The original article, the title is Crisis and Challenges. But later, I changed a little bit. I don't want to have the impression that I'm too much critical to the to the Chinese, so IR as a discipline. So I'm to modify to achievement, challenges and prospects. But actually I'm still keep on to the topic in the center, challenges and crisis. I'm going to speak some more about that. So it's simple, and just four things, and why I choose this topic, and what are the achievements of the IR as a discipline in China, and what are the challenges or even crises some people call them, and then so what is going to be in the future. So why the topic? I think it's directly related to my own experience, and because I was trained as a historian of international relations. So actually in Europe you call it international history, but because I was much American oriented, so I was trained as a U.S. diplomatic history. So in the U.S. normally they're still using the title of international relations, but history of international relations. But in European sometimes, as I know, we call it international history. So that means, and what I know more about is generally is the history of international relations. That's we just mentioned. I got so excited. I went to Potsdam, the Potsdam conference. That's one of my expertise, and from Cairo conference to Yalta and so during the World War II, and very unexpectedly I visited Westphalia Treaty. And every time when I teach the students, I say, so this is the beginning of the modern international relations, based on the Treaty of Westphalia, because for European it's very important. The state, the sovereign of state, is getting important than the power from the religion side. So then pop. And but from term of international relations, so that's the beginning of the sovereign state. Whatever the size of population, but if you're monarch from one state, then you will be equal with others, theoretically speaking. So that's what So my own experience actually was trained as a historian, and so methodological. Of course, that's the basically. So on history, and my studying field also is about history. But later, when I got my degree, and I got a job. So that job is in Jinan University. So that's I have to have two shifts. One shifts from history to much more contemporary. So this, the content of studying are changing. And another thing is methodologically, I have to, much more adapt to political science rather than history. So that means I have to, shift methodologically from the discipline of history to the discipline of political science. And another is from, much more history and to the modern and actually contemporary. Contemporary international relations, and especially in Southeast Asia and in East Asia. So that means why I have a very strong conscience, because I have to, although I come from history, but I have to teach students to teach student meeting and about theory of international relations, theory and methodology. So I have to try to learn, so what is the political science, what is IR, so the methodology, what is the difference is actually, every day I met the students, there, and even the faculties, we have a very diverse faculties. Some of them, they're from history, some of them are from, so that means for my personal experience, I much more have a strong, awareness or consciousness about different disciplines, and the difference between international relations, political science, and history. So that means also, so that's where I'm from, but also that's the limits. The limits, that means, so this is my own experience. And I also only know the history and political science, but not others. But actually I'm trying to expand it now to the sociology, anthropology now. That's why I go to, MPI, Max Planck Institute for Sociology, Anthropological Sociology. I met several scholars in Germany already. So the second thing is why this topic, because the IR as a display and in China, and was hotly debated in the past few years, especially from 2009 and the Olympic Games. After that, the Copenhagen Conference on Climate Change, and a lot of scholars found that the IR scholar was much marginalized by the topic, because it seems a lot of people work on the climate. Scientists, they have a lot of things to talk, but IR scholars they are keep quiet, and so then a lot of people, actually both the inside of the field and outsider people, they are trying to criticize, also try to challenge the IR as a discipline. So there's several very important articles if you go to on the website. Yeah, that should be in Chinese, but here it doesn't come about as a square. But it's something like that. IR as a discipline. Stepping into an end, and then the Chinese IR facing three major crises. So it's very strong criticism. They said as a discipline it meets crisis. And as a research field, also has a lot of challenges, and even to to be a to be an adversary like think tank. If you're writing some recommendations, policy recommendation to the government, still much more met a lot of crisis. So actually, it's inside the IR field, and many scholars, especially young scholars, they found the IR as a discipline are really facing a lot of problems, and they even call them crisis. So, and not only the insiders but outsiders. In the past few years, according to my knowledge, and I read several very good books on IR studies, but they are not traditionally IR scholars. Like one of the Zhao Tingyang. So that's one of the philosopher. And what he wrote serious publications philosophically about Asian Chinese the Tianxia system, Tianxia philosophy, and so that's quite very good quality academic research on the international system, although it's a topic it's from the very Asian China, and philosophically I think they are the best book, but not only by me, but a lot of IR scholars say, oh, that's a very good book. But Zhao Tingyang, he never to be a IR scholar. So he was a philosopher. And also another called Deng Zhenglai. And I'm sorry, he just died at the end of, beginning of this year, because of cancer. And he's a political philosopher. And one of his expertise about Hayek. Is it Hayek? Is one of the political philosopher. And but he also wrote quite widely on the IR issues, but not strictly IR scholars. And not only they are producing, the papers, but they also criticize. They say, oh, I think if you have a quotation from Deng Zhenglai, and he said, okay, the most something like premature, it's not mature, science is international politics. His international politics is out of date. So that's what he trying to criticize. So that's why I'm talking this topic. Actually, it's not only because my personal involvement, feeling, but also in the field and outside of fields. A lot of scholars they are talking about challenges. To be fair, I have to say something about achievements. Very simple and quickly try to finish. I think two perspectives. One of the people, another is organizations. The people actually, the professors, And for me today, and I always tell people, I'm a professor of international relations, And although I much like to be admitted as a scholar of international history. But anyway, because the IR are getting important, and so we do offer a degree on IR, but actually in China we call it law degree. So I will make a later explanation on that. It's more and more professors, and they could set they are the IR, IR scholars or IR professors. And students, it's a number of students, like more and more students are getting involved, study, whether from the, undergraduate program, the master's and PhD, and also postdoc. So they all are, more and more students are involving IR studies. And it's a lot of, research outputs. So I am teaching a course of theory of international relations, theory and methodology of IR. And I did prepare a kind of bibliograph, and from the very beginning, when I taught this course in Jinan University, and every year I'm trying to expanding that list. So in the year of 2003, and basically that's our theory. I mean, so the theory, books, all the bibliograph, not all, but the most important one just in China. And the first time I prepared that list, it's something like 3 pages, and but nowadays it's spending 15 pages of that. The reading list, not reading list, but bibliograph. I'm trying to let students know what the current, the research about IR theory basically and methodologies. And so definitely it's more and more. If you go to a bookstore, and they have special shelf, so for IR, international relations, American studies, generally foreign studies, and more books output are coming. The papers, every year have thousands of papers, because we have too many people in China, every people is writing. So in terms of quantity, I don't know whether we are number 1. It should be. Actually, it's a lot of, so outputs of the research, papers, monographs, and editable volumes, and more. And in terms of organization, and more universities, they are offering, this discipline and this degree from undergraduates. And undergraduates, we call that international politics, and not international relations, but so because that's different, And for the masters, so we do have masters of, as a kind of second, we call the second, I don't know so how to say that, is a branch. It's a sub branch of between under the political science. We call them international relations, international politics, diplomacy, comparative studies between Chinese and foreign politics, something like that, all related to the IR studies. And so more and more universities, as far as I know, and 2 years ago, I'm applying another undergraduate major. So I know that something like 75 universities are offering the undergraduate program on international politics.
In China. In China.
Yeah. Yes. And so that's so basically more and more universities are are doing that. And also not only university, but also a lot of research center, research organizations. And some of them directly affiliated to the university, but some of them, they are independent. Independent, that means they are not directly affiliated to attach to the university, but they could be independent. But another what I'm speaking, independent also is not necessarily attached to the government, but a lot of research institutes, they directly attach to the government. For example, the social academy sciences. So that's one of the very important. So just think tank actually. So many, but I know that several different branch within that. So they are involving the international relations. But it's good to not only official organizations, but also I know in the Shanghai they do have a kind of private, I don't know whether that's purely private, but because some people, the official, they retired, they do have a lot of power, facilities, and resources to do that. They started to run a kind of like think tank, independent think tank. So that's more and more research organization centers are coming out. So this is a basic, it's a general picture that actually in the past 30 years, IR as a discipline in China, we could not deny that there's a much more progress. If you compare 30 years ago, so we almost start from none, from zero. But now, it's actually booming. So everywhere they're competing for students, and now when people say crisis is the so many graduates, where are they going to go? So that's they are talking about, because more students, they have been trained, but not necessarily mean that they could find a position, related to the IR. So, but and this generally it's achievement. I think there's a lot of writings on IR as a discipline in China, in Chinese, both in Chinese and in English. If you have interest, you can find whatever the papers to see the. What I want to emphasize about the challenges of IR as a discipline in China. I think actually several challenges. I mean, objectively or subjectively. The first one is studying objects. What we are studying. International relations. The international relations is not capitalized. Some letters. International relations, as a reality, they are changing, and also the research conclusion, and that means theory basically. Theory are in debating, and also the methodologies, are still in debating, contending, and also in China we do have some special, Chinese style, Chinese way of the problem. One of the structure, I'm going to talk about the structural problems. So since this is not class, I'm not trying to teach other things. We talk about, the studying objects. I think very, very briefly or roughly say that maybe two categories we are studying when we talk about international relations. One is the actors, and unit level. So what are we studying? We are studying Germany, strong relation behavior, Chinese, America. So they are the players. And the second category could be a society, or we call international system. So that's not a simple, plus, America, China, Germany. Actually, if we coming together, the system, it's more complicated than that. It's much larger or bigger than 1 + 1 + 1. So that's the system. Actually, the system level and unit level. It's changing that, traditionally, nation state, at least for us, for the Chinese scholars, nation states are still very, very important now in nowadays international relations. If you know a lot of something happened, in East Asia. For example, we have the Diaoyu Island, dispute between China and Japan, and South China Sea dispute. That's much more basically is a territory, and sovereign, all this kind of issues. So traditionally, your nation state has been, or it was, but it is. I don't know, the situation in Europe probably is changing, but in China, I'm sure. So, and it's going to be, the most important actors still be there. And however, the rise of the non-state actors, and sub-state actors, like Islam bin Laden, right? That's an individual, right? They did play a very important role in international relations today. So everybody, if you involving international security studies, you could not overlook this, right? So they are not state. They are individual. Sometimes they are organizations, sub-state actors. But besides that, we still have transnational actors, and NGO and GO, right? Governmental organizations like United Nations, and also the NGO. It's a lot of such kind of organizations. They are playing more and more important role in international relations, but probably in different field and a different region. They might be different, but we could not ignore that. So that's a very rising role of the non-state actors. They are becoming quite important. So the simply speaking, the IR research objects are changing, even in China, right? So that's a challenge for the IR scholars. So how do you deal with that? Are you still trying to focus on, the nation state, or how about the other rising and actors? So the second thing is, as the system level, like the international system, and if you use the quotation from the English school, because international society, or maybe today as the political, the politicians, they like to see much things, good. They are using the, international or global community, right? Actually, I do think the system, the society and community, they are not same. So much more institutionalized, much more systematic. So it should be, to the degree so it's different. But however, so the international system as a whole, are changing, and its background, like globalization, and actually it's changing everything. The international system is changing. For example, it's much, if you compare with the, especially if you take Europe as an example, right? It's much more, law-based today. For example, the United Nations getting more and more important, and European court, you do have a court, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I heard story. That's not a story actually. Several years ago, there's a parliament member from Hamburg. He visited Jinan University. He delivered a speech to the students, and during his speech, he gave us an example. He said something. I don't know. There's a woman, and he do have some dispute with the German government. Probably he want to join the army or retired from the army, and then however, and she sued German government, and then he failed, and then he sued again to the European court, and so that's natural because people like to go to the above, the much higher level. But the things for me, it's so quite interesting is that the European Union court, I don't know what the name of court, and they said, okay, German government, you did wrong, so you should to redo the case. And so this is okay, but even Chinese, sometimes they also go to United Nations to sue some Chinese government. But the more interesting thing is that German government accepted that decision, so they redo that. But I know what is the afterwards story. But it says
the army was open for female soldiers.
So for me, it's interesting is that where's the sovereignty? Where's the sovereign of the German government, right? It's basically from the traditional definition of sovereign. That means government, they will final say on the things, so local, whether it's right or wrong. Even you are innocent, but I'm sorry because you are the, you are the people, you are the citizen within this territory. So this is it really is changing, right? International society as a whole, and are changing. And so that's the content. What we are studying, they are changing, themselves. So we have tried to, to learn how to deal with that. And second thing is about, generally speaking, is the, debates on the conclusion. The conclusion, how do you, if you observe something happened, China and Japan, they are, debating, and they almost, fight, war on the Diaoyu Island. So different people, they might have a different conclusion. And basically that's involved the theory, right? So then if we talk about the theory of international relations, and I think everybody should know that we passed several rounds of debate. I don't know how many for you. At least for us, I think 5 rounds. The first, there's imperialism and Marxism. Probably you do not take that into account. Revolution, and then the realism and utopian, liberalism, or idealism. So at that time, and then the third probably realism and scientific, and most current probably it's a new realism and new rationalism and constructivism. We are all round debating, and I'm sure we are going to still debating. So that's it's quite normal, but sometimes it's a little bit difficult for a scholar, So how do you make the conclusion sometimes? And the current debate, neorealism, so neoliberalism, and constructivism. There's a lot of different branches, historical constructivism or social constructivism or so whatever. So it's a lot of the. I mean, the conclusion itself are in a state of debating. There's no final conclusion. And, personally, I didn't expect the final conclusion. If there's a conclusion, you know, we don't need any student to do that again, right? So this is the. But however, I mean, because of the debate happening in the IR theories, you know, that's still some about challenges for the, you know, for the IR as a discipline in China. The third is the contending, you know, research methodology. And this is quite, you know, a very popular things from Max Weber, right? Scientificism and, you know, classical. I'm using quote here as it seems that I think Schoner in English school, one of the one of the scholars of English school, and Hadley Bull, and so he wrote an article said a classical approach, right? International relations, like something like that. And then we know that a lot of scientific methodologies and today, and for example, if you want to go to America, some universities like Johns Hopkins, like I know, if you do not know, you know, very complex mathematics, you're not qualified to be there. So that's the basic, you know, preconditions, qualifications if you want to be a scholar of IR there. So because they are much more, you know, the quantitative studies, you know. So that's and if it take case in China, basically I think most of the scholars or the major, you know, theme are still historical. I mean, classical, you know, much more historical. Like, you know, my, you know, background, and I was trained as a historian, and I don't like mathematics, you know. And instantly, if I read, you know, all the, you know, the datas and, you know, even the formulas, and then I fall asleep. So, yeah, I know that's not wrong, that's not right, but, you know, it's very difficult because I'm getting older, you know, I cannot learn the new things. That's, and as I know, but very few, you know, in China, as I know, there's Tsinghua University. So that's one of the very few organizations. They much more focus on the, you know, method. They said so the social sciences, the method is much more important. If you do not have a good methodology, you cannot do the research. So actually, they have a summer school to train the new students every year, and a lot of students to be there. I have been there, and also, but that's too short. You know, it's only for 2 weeks, but definitely it's not enough. But I do know that, you know, if you take international background, especially America, you know, much more, some people tell me is 75-80% on scientific quantitative studies. Qualitative studies, you know, 20%. If you graduate from here, you must go that 20%. Otherwise, you cannot find a job. But in China, you know, there's a debate, and to be fair, I think the two, they are competing, but they don't know each other very well. I know scientific is important, but actually I don't know what is really scientific method, you know, how to do that step by step, you know. So yeah, I think so. There's a bias, there's a prejudice, and also the Tsinghua University, one of the dean called Professor Yan Xuetong, and he said, you know, when he started the IR department in Tsinghua University, he never got a kind of state level research projects, because some people sitting in that committee, they just very against that the so-called scientific. You know, they said, okay, if I think that Professor Yan told me, he said the very senior, you know, prestigious professor said, is I were there, you cannot get even one. You know, that's the most highest research projects, you know, from the state level. So that means they are contending, you know. Although for the younger scholars, we are trying to, you know, to just mix them together, but still keep in debating. The final problems about China, I think there's I don't know whether that's proper way of expressing English, because English is not my mother tongue, but we call it discipline, setting or approve power. Normally for a university, if you want to set up a new discipline, a new major, that is very difficult. You could apply to, to increase, to add a one, but that one should be in the list, approved by the ministry. But now they are getting more flexible, a lot of change. You might, have add a new one. It's not on the list, but that's take a long time, long procedures. Like if you want to, to do some change to the constitutions, sometimes it's even difficult than that. It take a much long time. But it's getting better. But anyway, so this is, I think, is a structural problem. It's very difficult for the IR scholars if you want to set something new. Just like the name. The name, for the undergraduates, the name called international politics. You cannot use international relations, Then we have to try to be creative. Sometimes I'm in charge of the undergraduate, student recruiting, and student doesn't like politics. And also they hate, international politics. Politics itself is not that interesting. International politics, so what's that mean? But if international relations, they might know that, relations, economic relations, economic relations and cultural relations, it should be, wider. So I have to use the, you cannot change the name international politics. And then I have a parenthesis. I said, okay, focus on international economic relations. Then the students come, economics, trade, relations, international, that's much popular. So we have to, to do that because we can't change the name. But now I know they are changing. But now they could, you could set an undergraduate program on international politics based. That's the most important one. But now they still have something like international relations and international affairs. I think this is going to be, a better one than international politics. So now personally, I'm trying change, our name from international politics to international relations and international affairs. So this is for the undergraduates. For the masters and the postdoc and doctor, the name there is international relations, but they are belong to the political science. Political science is the mother, discipline, and then you have the branch, called international politics, international relations, and now we have IPE, international political economy, and diplomacy. All actually many names. But frankly speaking, I really cannot distinguish. I can distinguish because the students are from, they are from different, because when they fill the form, what is your will? What are you going to choose? If you choose international politics, you will be a student in international politics. But when they come here, for me, I think they're all the same. But we have to do that, because if a different discipline, that means resources. Because that's a government dominant, that means you could set up a school, for example. You could set up a department. And then you could have your, have your teaching, recruit members. But if you do not have a, discipline based, and it's very difficult to survive in the university. So although we don't know what is the difference between international politics and international relations, I do know, but I know that I need to set up a two department, and then I could apply, more teaching positions, and more teachers could come. So that means more students, more teachings, and that's departments. So that's basically thing. And so this is really challenging. Challenging not only for IR, but for whatever, science, because the society, the world is changing so much, so quickly. So we know that, as a scholar, we know that this is important. But you know the importance, and you're writing a report, writing a proposal, and to the government, you know, to the university. When you're finished, all the procedures, maybe in 2 or 3 years, it's gone. So this is very bureaucratic. So this is quite a challenge. Not only, so it is a challenge for the IR in particular, but you know, to whatever disciplines in general. And last year we hold a kind of a national conference. It's about, you know, we call that the China University International Politics Association, you know, something like that. And we just got a new list of the discipline set by the, was issued, not issued, you know, that draft, you know, was sent by the ministry. Of course, the ministry, they are collecting the different opinions from universities, from scholars. We quite got shocking. The news is that international relations is not there anymore because international politics. We were really shocked. So, because we do have something like 35 to 40 School of International Relations in China University now. If the new list, there's no such name for international relations, all the schools of international relations will be in trouble, you know, because how do you convince the president, you know, to give you funding? What is the legitimacy to persuade that this is a discipline because it's not on the list? So now we are trying, you know, to mobilizing all the scholars to writing appeal to them and say, you know, we need international relations. But some people said it's good. Probably the political science kick us out. We might set a new, you know, same level, the mother, you know, it's the first level, you know, and discipline, you know, equal to the political science. We might call them international studies, international relations. So that's could be an opportunity, but you know, we're still working on that. But I mean, yes. So then how do we interpret it? So this change, and I think, you know, it's particularly in China, you know, like so what I mentioned, you know, the discipline setting or approval power, you know, by the Ministry of Education, and still another thing is that, you know, because China really changed a lot, pretty quickly. If you, in the past 30 years, if you visit Guangzhou, for example, this year and next year, you know, a lot of places you cannot recognize. This changed so you know, drastically, and China's position, I mean, China's image in the world are still changing. Sometimes I feel very difficult, you know, to be the governor, you know, to be a president of China, because they are really facing a lot of pressures domestically and also internationally. If China want to move, do a little bit movement, then all the other people say, oh, what are you trying to do? But sometimes if they keep on change, they say, why you don't change? Is there any you know, strategy, any conspiracy there? So it's very difficult, because the China is, you know, if I take China as a whole, you know, rational actor, unitary actor. So for example, China was the number 2, you know, in terms of GDP. So China's influencing are getting more and more important. So that means the studying object itself, so it's changing so dramatically. So that's quite challenging, you know, for the scholars, for the observers. But, you know, generally, it's not only China's problem. It's not only China's case, but still internationally, you know, several very important cases happened, you know, especially, you know, the end of Cold War. And I'm not going to say more about that because you are all European, so you should know the German, you know, unifications and the end of Cold War. Actually, you know, it's very important. Wherever it's shock, you know, to the international scholars, because it seems that the poverty of the theory is still, you know, very, very realistic nation state, and we thought, you know, it's going to be a war between them, and one's defeated, but actually it's ended peacefully, not because about war, but because domestically, you know. That's a same logic, but it seems in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, all the IR scholars, they're much more focused on the system level rather than the state itself. So that's a great challenge to the IR theorist. And globalization and technology and information. So people sharing the information, and this really changes, the people's perception, people's idea, and also, involving even the policy. So not only Chinese scholars, face the problem. I think even, and internationally, it's one scholar from Susan Strange. I think, it's many of you should read, so something from her. And I'm very much impressed with the book he called the Retreat of the Retreat of National Authority. Yes, something, because I read Chinese, And there's one thing he said, she said, I have worked in the IR field for almost 50 years. If international politics internationally keep its way as it was, I will say, so this is the time for me to depart with this discipline. So that means she's really getting dissatisfied with what's going on about the IR, the mainstream IR scholars. Yeah, but that's happening end of last century. And another Robert Jervis, another very well-known international political theorist, and but Robert Jervis he said himself, his best research is not about international relations, but it's one book. It's called complexity effects, something effects of system effects something, and then the complexity in political and social life. Yeah, something. The book is a very important book. It's very so that's, and in that book, everybody know he's quite famous in IR research, but he said his best study is not about that, but it's something else. So this is I think generally is the challenge. Or do we have a future? Yes, I think so. And whatever future it is, so it's going to be. So we do have a future. Then what is the way? Are there any way out? For IR as a discipline in China? Several scenarios, several possibilities. One of the possibilities, because the international relations itself is changing, and then IR, as a political science, as a discipline, should change. That's why you call global politics. And now it's, even in China, so many universities, they're trying to change the name to world politics rather than international politics. I think this is the one way. Actually, it's reasonable, because we found that, if international is much more focused on nation state, but if we take into the other rising actors, into consideration, we might better to use a world politics or global politics, or we can find maybe another more bigger or wider than global, So that's one way to change that, But this is difficult in the Chinese context, because like what I just mentioned, the setting of the discipline, so the authority is not from bottom up, but it's from. Yeah, of course, there's something from bottom, but it takes time. Generally, that's very difficult for the university to set up a new thing, And the second thing is that, synthesis of the IR research, much more, from the systematic, like Robert Jervis said, the systematic effects, Actually, I think one of the very advantage of the IR scholars, you should have a wider perspective than the people are involved in the political science. I don't know whether this is right or wrong. Okay, and I always tell the students, okay, you should take a much wider system, right? The system, something putting them together, but it's bigger than the unit. So this is a kind of, interdependence, for example, and still need, you know, a kind of cross or so disciplinary. For example, in our school, we are School of International Studies, but also we are Academy of Overseas Chinese Studies. So if you're doing overseas Chinese studies, you cannot only to do that from perspective of international relations. That's so boring actually. It's much more should be from sociology, anthropology. So that's why I came here and this time I went to MPI to talk a lot of scholars, you know, they are from sociologists, and I have a feeling that they really look down upon us. It's all international relations, international politics. That's a little bit far. Of course, they don't know us. So that's yeah. Anyway, I think from the sociology, you know, historian and other perspectives, it's much more important because we want to do a kind of, you know, it's a question, not necessary to confine ourselves, you know, in one discipline. But in China, it's different because the discipline is so important. It's discipline based. You know, which school are you from? You know, that means, you know, you get resources there. You must, although you know you are not that different from others, but you have to pretend even to be different because political science is different from law. If some people said you are the same, then what is the legitimacy to exist? So that's things. And third, you know, possibility, actually, I think we are trying to think as a research, you know, things that problem solving based rather than the discipline based. You know, how to try solve the problem. Like taking the example over Chinese studies. You know, you might from different perspective, sociology, you know, international relations and China's relations with others. You know, so try to think the thing. You know, not that discipline based. Although we were trained, you know, from. And especially, I think this is very striking, very obvious in China, like what I mentioned, because that's the whole university, all the higher education system, much more based on the discipline. And specific to China, I think we do have some much more promising, happy futures about, and very personally and very anti, you know, to the thesis, to the theory. They call this, you know, some people call the Chinese School of International Relations. Or we use the Chinese way, we always said, is the international relations with Chinese characteristic, right? That means we are Chinese are different from others, all right? You know, previously I'm very much more anti, you know, to this, because when you talk about research, study, theory, when we talk about theory, it should be universal. Although it comes from the specific context, but it should be applicable to apply to the other cases, right? And but however, I think, you know, to be a student, IR student in China, I do encourage students try to focus on the questions for China in international relations itself, and also in the discipline of international relations. For example, you know, a lot of example could to see that, you know, China's rise today, right? And because China is rising, right? Whether, you know, it's that's a perception or misperception, but the perception is that China it is rising. And of course you could, you know, challenge what's the rise mean. But, you know, I mean, the perception sometimes is much more important because people think so. Why we think so, right? Even sometimes your thinking, your perception is more important than the reality, because if you do think this is the way, although that's not that way, but why? Why so? And of course, a lot of things, you know, relate to the China studies, you know, for example, China's historical experience in the world, you know, from the very ancient times, but no, actually, more and more scholars are devoting, are doing the research, you know, from the very ancient China, not only Chinese scholars. I mean, we might expecting a Chinese school of international relations, but not necessarily they are all Chinese scholars. Actually, a lot of Western scholars, they did much pretty better job than a lot of Chinese scholars. you know, especially go back to my field, historian. You know, a lot of people they done the modern Chinese history. You know, the historians from America, in Europe, you know, sinologists, they did much quite, you know, remarkable progresses, and also very inspiring, you know, to for the Chinese scholars. Like what just mentioned, you know, Zhao Tingyang is one philosopher. They're doing, you know, the very ancient Chinese thinking, you know, or the 天下体系. I don't know 天下体系. So how to say that in English? 天下体系. Yes, something like that. All under one heaven. You know, and like the, you know, the ancient Chinese tributary system. So that's one of the very important. I always talk with my students. You know, like, you know, yeah, that's from the Western perspective. That's unfair. You know, that's unequal, because the Chinese, you are the center. The other people, you know, they are barbarians or whatever. Yeah, but if you know try to get rid of that thing, you know, if you think that's sustainable, I mean, at least it's the order. There is an order there. There's no war, generally, right? Less war if you compare with the European. So, yeah, that's order. So what does that order mean? Does that order could provide some implication today? So that's a lot of scholars. More and more Chinese scholars are doing things to that. I know that's philosophical. Actually, you know, in reality, that's anyway. But you know, it's a kind of, you know, new discovery, new research on the scholars. And to make a conclusion, I think if you try to focus on the China as a case in international relations, so I think we are going to have we could have a new space of IR studies, not only beneficial to Chinese scholars, but also I'm sure it's going to be beneficial to the international relations as a whole, for the whole international relations community. Yeah, I think I'll stop here.
Thank you very much.